So, what happens when the very things that are supposed to hold a country together start to fall apart? And I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally. We're talking about bridges, flyovers, flood defenses, massive billion-dollar projects that are meant to keep people safe and connected. But in the Philippines, something is going seriously wrong. And that really is the question at the heart of all this. Why do these massive, expensive projects keep failing? It's a story of some really shocking collapses, staggering costs, and a system that, just seems to let people down again and again. So let's get into it.
All right, let's start with the most dramatic failures. The kind of stuff you see in a breaking news alert. Sudden, catastrophic collapses of huge bridges. Okay, so picture this. A brand new bridge, the Cabaguns to Maria Bridge. It cost a whopping 1.2 billion pesos. This thing was a huge deal, celebrated as this vital new link for the entire region. They had a whole grand opening, lots of high hopes.
And then it was gone. Just a few weeks later, it completely collapsed. A heavy truck was crossing, and the whole thing just gave way. The public outrage was, as you can imagine, huge. A presidential probe was launched immediately. So what on earth went so wrong so fast?
Well, here's where it gets almost unbelievable. The expectation? A modern suspension bridge. You know the kind, with those giant, super strong steel cables holding up the road. That's kind of the whole point of a suspension bridge. But the reality? They built it with, wait for it, no steel support cables. It's an engineering mistake so fundamental, it's just mind-boggling.
And here's the really scary part. This wasn't just a one-off disaster. It's a pattern. In 2022, the Loa Claren Bridge collapsed right in the middle of traffic, killing 4 people. That same year, another major bridge failed from just old age and bad maintenance. And then, in 2023, another brand new bridge collapsed within weeks because, get this, it was built in a place officially designated as a no-build zone. You just can't make this stuff up.
But not every failure is a big, sudden collapse. Some are more like a disaster in slow motion, a slow, grinding crisis that ends up being just as damaging and just as expensive.
For a perfect example, look at the Engr flyover in Iloilo. This $680 million project opens in September 2022. 12 days later, it's shut down. Why? Because it was literally sinking into the ground. Turns out the soil analysis was completely botched, and now years later, it's still sinking and it's totally useless. Just a giant, expensive monument to failure. Or think about the constant flooding in Metro Manila. I mean, after decades and billions spent on upgrades, why does the city still grind to a halt after just a little bit of rain? Well, here's why. A staggering 70%, 70, of the city's entire drainage system is clogged with garbage and silt, making it pretty much useless when it's needed most. So this all leads us to the real heart of the problem. These aren't just accidents. The evidence all points to this toxic mix of corruption, just pure negligence, and something that people in the Philippines call ghosts. So, what in the world is a ghost project? Well, it's pretty much as spooky as it sounds. It's a project that gets funded by the government, the money gets paid out, the official paperwork is filed saying, yep, it's all done. The only problem? It was never actually built. It only exists on paper. It's just straight up fraud. And this corruption shows up in a couple of different ways. On one hand, you have the ghost projects, like in Bulacan, where nearly 6 billion pesos were paid for flood control projects that just didn't exist. But then you have the other side of the coin, like in Ilolo, where 1.2 billion was spent, but the flood control they built was so bad it actually made the flooding worse for over 56,000 people. And even when it's not outright corruption, there's this pattern of just willful negligence. We're talking about ignoring official hazard maps and building in known landslide zones. We're talking about using building codes that are dangerously out of date, a huge reason why so many buildings collapsed in a major earthquake back in 1990. And it means skipping the most basic engineering steps, like proper soil testing, which is exactly what doomed that sinking flyover from the very beginning. So what's the actual cost of all this? We're not just talking about wasted money here. We're talking about real, devastating impacts on people's lives and the economy. Over 6,000. That's how many people died from the storm surge during Typhoon Yolanda back in 2013. A tragedy made so much worse because of a near total lack of proper coastal defenses. Over 56,000. That's the number of people in Iloo who are repeatedly affected by floods because the projects meant to protect them actually made the problem worse. And 16 billion pesos. That's a hard number to even wrap your head around. It's the amount the government had to pay in compensation for a single flawed airport terminal. Imagine how many schools, hospitals, or, functional bridges that money could have built instead. And all of this brings us to this one really frustrating question. See, after every one of these disasters, there's this big flurry of activity. But does any of it actually lead to real change? Or is the country just stuck in this endless cycle of collapse?
Because after every failure, the response is almost like a script. It's so predictable. The president orders a probe. The Senate calls for an inquiry. Audits are launched. Some officials are publicly relieved of their duties, and a few contractors get investigated. We see this exact same pattern play out every single time.
And that leads us to the final and most important question. All these actions are taken, right? All these investigations happen. It all creates the appearance of accountability, but the failures keep happening, which leaves us with one unavoidable question. If everyone is always being investigated, why does nothing ever seem to change?